speech. No one can doubt now that the Prime Minister's claim to have abolished boom and bust was one of the greatest deceits ever told to the British people. The Chancellor has just announced the largest amount of borrowing ever undertaken by a British government in the entire history of this country. And what he did not admit is that he is going to double the national debt to £1 trillion, and that a national debt that has accumulated over centuries is going to double in just 5 years. That is the bill for Labour's decade of irresponsibility initiated by our Prime Minister. And Mr. Speaker, to pay for it, he has placed a huge, unexploded tax bombshell, time to go up underneath the future economic recovery. He talked about a 0.5% adjustment, and the people opposite didn't understand what that means. What it means is he's giving £20 billion in giveaways and taking back £40 billion in higher taxes, including the major rise in national insurance, a tax on the jobs and incomes of Middle Britain. It is confirmation of the time-old truth that in the end all Labour chancellors run out of money, and all Labour governments bring this country to the verge of bankruptcy. Stability has gone out of the window. Prudence is dead. Labour has done it again. Massive borrowing, rising unemployment, tax giveaways for Christmas paid by tax rises for life. Giving with one hand, taking with another, everything we have come to expect from this Prime Minister. He says the recession will end halfway through 2009, but the tax rises won't come in until 2011. I wonder why he chose those dates. This budget is all about the political cycle and not the economic cycle. Now, Mr. Speaker, those borrowing figures are on a scale never before heard in the House of Commons. The £78 billion this year is almost double what he forecast just 8 months ago. The £118 billion next year is a record percentage of national income. He has added £512 billion to the national debt over the next 6 years. And by the way, these are based on growth forecasts, which are vastly more optimistic than most independent forecasters. And that means the Chancellor is borrowing more on the nation's credit card than all previous governments put together. And now he is taking out another credit card. For still, like the gambler who can't give up, he thinks he can borrow his way out of debt. These are the excuses that the Chancellor has deployed. First, he claims that the recession has nothing to do with the people who've been running the country's economic policy for the last 10 years. It's all America's fault, he says. What total nonsense. Was it America that gave Britain the biggest housing boom in the world? No. Was it America that gave Britain the highest levels of personal debt of any country in history? No. Was it America that gave Britain the largest budget deficit in the developed world? No. It was this Labour government. And Mr. Speaker, no American politician said they had rewritten the laws of economics. No American Treasury Secretary boasted he'd done away with the trade cycle and abolished boom and bust. It was the Prime Minister who said those ludicrous things over and over again. He mistook a boom for stability, and he never prepared Britain for the bust. Now, the second excuse the Chancellor made today is that he faces this recession from what he called a position of relative strength. Relative to who? Because if he spoke to anyone other than the Prime Minister, he might find that his is not a view widely shared in the world. If he's right that Britain is better prepared, then could he answer this simple question? Why is the recession predicted to be worse here than anywhere else? He reeled off that list of countries in his statement. Let me give him this list from the IMF. Britain's recession, they say, will be more severe than America, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, Spain, and every other major economy in the world. What about this list from the Commission? Britain's structural deficit is almost double France's, 3 times Italy's, and over 10 times larger than the deficit in Germany. The truth is that the Prime Minister built our economic growth on the pillars of finance and housing and government spending, and he never once stopped to think what would happen if the pillars collapsed. He ran a huge budget deficit on the unstable premise that he could milk the city every year, and never considered to think what would happen to the public finances when the money ran dry. He did not fix the roof when the sun was shining. And that leads us to the third excuse used by the Chancellor today. He believes the temporary tax measures he has announced will deliver some huge demand boost to an economy that they have led into recession. Let us be clear that half of those measures he just announced are for compensating people for their own 10p tax con and delaying the tax rises he announced from that dispatch box just 8 months ago. The Labour MPs opposite, they cheered these measures when they were introduced. Now they cheer them when they're scrapped. I doubt the rest of the country will be so pathetically grateful that the Chancellor is going to wait a year or two before clobbering their family cars and empty properties and small businesses. And as for the temporary VAT reduction, we will see if this has the great economic effect that the Prime Minister expects. He didn't tell us that actually today the German and French governments have ruled out a similar move because they don't think it will be effective. He didn't tell us that already today many retailers are questioning the cost of implementing it and the impact it will have on the high street when many shops are already selling things at 20 or 30% off. Borrowing money for a temporary cut when prices are already falling and telling people their taxes will go up to pay for it is not much of a stimulus. Now, what will make a difference? What will make a difference are the massive new taxes on ordinary incomes and jobs coming just around the corner. He got a cheer from his own benches when he announced the higher top rate of income tax. No surprise there. But that raises less than 5% of the black hole he has to fill. And it is designed to distract attention from the billions of pounds of extra taxes that are on their way for millions of hard-working families. And now we at least know one of those tax rises, national insurance, an income tax in all but name. He didn't give his figures, so I will. £4 billion tax increase on families and jobs, more in tax for a qualified nurse, more for a police officer, £100 million on the annual NHS wage bill, £2 billion from British business. This isn't just a bombshell, it is a precision-guided missile at the heart of a recovery. And then there is the final excuse we heard from the Chancellor today, that despite all the economic evidence of the last 40 years, Britain can borrow and spend our way out of this recession. Does he not see any parallels in what happened to Japan, who followed the path he advocates today and found itself saddled with debt and stagnation for a decade? The international bodies he quotes in his defence state very clearly that a fiscal stimulus is only an option for countries with strong public finances. Or perhaps this generation of Labour politicians needs to be reminded of what Jim Callaghan told them at their Labour Party conference. The Lord Chancellor was probably there. We used to think that you could spend your way out of a recession and increase employment by cutting taxes and boosting government spending. I have to tell you in all candour that option no longer exists. And if the